our keynote speaker, Lori Bieda, Chief Data and Analytics Officer, BMO Financial Group. She's led top-tier analytics transformations across banking, consulting, and telecom, and she's a passionate advocate for building data talent from the ground up. Please join me with a round of applause to welcome a trailblazer in the field, Lori Bieda.
I'm quickly going to be replaced by AI is what I took out all of that. And I'm laughing because nobody's seated at the front. So at some point, there's going to be people running up here and doing the walk of shame like they're on The Price is Right. So come on up. There's reserved signs, but there's no one at the tables. And you know, they said it would be easy, right? They said it would be transformative and automative, and they said it would be self-generating. They, right? Like, who the hell are they? Because from where I sit, as Chief Data and Analytics and AI Officer in my space, I see that things are a little funny, right? I see that we're in the swirl of this transformation. And I see that there are people maybe generating and using AI, maybe for good and maybe not so good. Is it being used by our students? Is it being used by the kids who are crafting their essays, or those crazy people who like to see themselves in pictures with cats? And maybe all of the above. But it's serious, right? And I think that what is happening is our organizations are embracing AI in a way and learning what it's capable of from our social cues. And then they're bringing that into the corporate culture, and it's pretty serious, right? And we started with this tone of governance. But I would contend that the tables were set for AI from Gen AI and from what we've seen organizationally, what we've seen outside of our organizations. And so AI has become synonymous with Gen AI, even though there's a cocktail of stuff around there that surrounds AI. Now, machine learning has been in play in our own organizations, and I'm sure many of yours, for decades. We've been building machine learning algorithms for a long time. We have 200 at play at any one time in our retail bank. Natural language processing and all of the chunking of data that we had to do and the sentiment analysis and all of that, the roots of that have been in play for some time, haven't they? And we've been doing automation, robotics, all these sort of underpinnings, but the world has fallen in love with data and analytics and AI. And they've taken Gen AI and said everything can be automated. And as practitioners in the room who are responsible for that automation, there's one part excitement when all of your business partners are getting their cues for what is possible by reading the news and looking on Instagram and thinking everything's agentic. And then there's the reality where we sit building the infrastructure, governing that mess, and trying to figure out how do you automate and build bots at scale? How do you do that? And in the positions that we're in, and we're doing that each day, how do you do it? Who does it? And what's this process that you go from everything being not automated at all to automated? And where's the human in that loop? And what does that look like? What kind of humans do we need helping us along the way? And so from BMO's perspective, we've had for many years now what I'll call a digital-first mindset. So when we look at things, we say, all right, what can we digitize of all that we have? Whether it's a process, it's an onboarding protocol, can we go mobile first? What does that look like? And if there were glasses on your face, you'd look through those lenses and everything would be colored by digital first. And more recently, we've looked at it the same way, but from an AI first lens. So when you're looking at a role that you're going to hire for, when you're looking at a process or a particular task, what can be AI-ified? That's the lens. What can be digitized? What can be AI-ified? And obviously, you need both in order to work and go at scale. But like many of us, we've been in a swirl trying to figure out how do we govern this? Like, how do we set up the guardrails? What are the directives that we have to have in place in order for this whole thing to work? And like many of you, we were obsessed with that, going, oh my goodness, like when this thing, we got to protect ourselves, and what are the rules? What are the processes? Who needs to approve what aspects? What can we build that's customer-facing versus non? And meanwhile, the world's progressing, and the world keeps progressing, and the world keeps progressing. And we're like, how do we keep pace with where it is the technology is going and the consumers, what they expect with our governance, right? We're a highly regulated industry. So we've spent a lot of time figuring that out, and we threw a lot of people at it. And those people were typical data governance folks, right? Going, this is what data governance does, but they'd never seen this before. The idea of putting anything that was autonomous or machine learning or generated into a system, they didn't know how to govern that. So we err on the side of immense collaboration, like grab everyone who can say AI, put them in a room from all the various risk groups and talk it out. And every use case that pops up, talk that out. And talk about the dark side of that movie, talk about the bright side, figure it out. Because there really was no directive to accommodate it. Even though in principle, we're like, we need to make sure that things aren't going to go south. We need to prevent hallucinations. We need to navigate bias. We all know notionally we need to do this. But when things start automating and things start automating at scale, how do you do that? How do you look at all the systems that it hits and the workflow? And I think all of us know that good AI is predicated on really good data, clean data, curated data, connected data, data that runs and flows across various systems. So and I think it's interesting because I think that AI, the presentment of the possibilities of AI will cause enrichment in our data. You know that stuff we've been chasing for decades to get funded? I think you'll get it funded because the payback will be there if AI needs to use it. And so we too have been busy doing that, cloudifying the data, moving it, trying to figure out, and there's a whole other new set of capabilities because not a lot of folks are familiar with migrating data to the cloud, the risks affiliated with that, what you're going to put in the cloud, what you're not, what's on-prem, how elastic it is, but how costly it is. So navigating all of those pieces, and when you think about what happens in a world of AI and you're rolling forward the costs affiliated with data in the cloud, that's a new normal. So we've been sitting down trying to figure that out and get the right people to help us figure that out, which hasn't been easy, right? New AI people, new cloud people, and new people together trying to build stuff that are AI applications. And so AI, of course, and we'll talk about this later in some of our examples, comes with good automation. Like you can't really have it without some degree of automation. And I would contend in the early days for the stuff, and I'll talk about what is human in the loop versus AI alone versus human alone, but we've found that there's many situations where we need a human in the loop, but you don't always provision for that. You're not quite sure what tasks require a human in the loop. And right now we're thinking, well, a human needs to be in the loop and in the know across all of it. Maybe that's not true, but then you have to tease apart the tasks to figure that out. Because in our minds, we're headed to an agentic world. We're headed to a world, and in my mind, there's threes. There's data, there's intelligence, and there's some action you take off of it. And ideally, that whole stack is automated. But there's a lot that has to happen by way of governance, by way of data setup, and certainly by way of understanding all of the flow of that in an effort to get to agentic so that things can be automated. So a couple things that we've learned along the way, and we've earned some stripes, and it's been good progress, but I'll talk to you about some of these examples because they'll illuminate some of what I'm talking about. And so in our call center, we obviously have millions and millions of calls that are coming in on any monthly basis. And there's queues affiliated with what those customers are calling about. So it's figuring out what is the subject, what's the task, what's the sentiment, where have they been on their journey, and by the time they hit us, how are we going to triage this thing? So we've been in the process of doing a lot of natural language processing to parse this apart and make sense of it, and have won some awards along the way in order to do that. And this is all about rapidly, and I feel like there's like some kind of ghost in the room. There's lights going off and lights going on. It's very dramatic. It's very dramatic. I planned this as part of the presentation. And then all the way through to building AI assistants. And I think the world's aflame with bots, right? And what is this going to look like when it grows up? And so from our perspective, we built, and there's this debate around whether it should be customer-facing or non-customer-facing. And initially, we had this allergic reaction to go, oh my goodness, we're going to test all this stuff in the background, don't expose anything to a customer, God forbid, if there's an issue and we're learning on their dime. But the reality is we tried a bit of both. We tried through the home buying transformation process, which is, if you think about the purchases you make in a life, the single greatest purchase that you make, typically, from a monetary perspective for most of us. And it's tended to be something that is very, very human-focused, right? You want that trust, you want that level of engagement. But lo and behold, there's large swaths of that process, from the paperwork collection, all the digitization, the signing off, and even the collaboration on the rates, which a lot of people don't necessarily want a human across the table for. So there's been a lot of work on bodifying the home buying transformation process, which works, and consumers like it. And relatedly, there's an instance that we have where and you call into any financial organization, in behind all this, there's a truckload of policy. right? That which is governed for us, these nuanced questions like, hey, I've just separated, and what do I do with the mortgage? How do I set it up? How do I separate my finances? There are many, many, many edge cases, and for us, those were captured in a series of more than 8,000 policies. And each policy has pages and pages of detail. And if you're Susie Banker, you're in for a world of hurt because you're engaging with the customer in real time and having to draw on those documents in the background. It's rough. Any good database is going to have a hard time pulling any fact into play there. So we looked at it from the lens of, could we bodify this? Like, could we make that level of engagement and that conversation appropriate? And could it facilitate that? Now, these are bankers who are used to doing this for a living. So the first instinct was, oh my God, they're going to hate this because it's going to replace part of their work. And then so we pulled them in and we said, all right, help us co-design this in an agile fashion. Help us create this solution with us. A couple things we learned along the way is that one is it's really hard to extract value and understanding out of people for what it is that they do every day. What's the questions you're actually asking? What are the questions you're getting from customers? What do they look like? People tend to understand that, but they don't necessarily know how to engage with ChatGPT. Think of the examples that Neha just offered around positioning yourself as a poet. Like, and we've done this as jokes in our own town halls to say, you know, give me this whole thing in a riff, like play it back to me. Take the content of my presentation and play it back to me in poetic, you know, iambic pentameter. It does it, and it does it in a way that is quite surprising. But therein lies this idea that there's a level of awareness that you can proxy for something. So you could say, I'm a newly separated woman, and I'd like to understand the policies around mortgages and how they factor in to the process and what paperwork I need to prepare. But you're channeling your inner individual. It's a different persona, different persona. We learned a lot about prompt engineering. Prompt engineering is not at all what it is for asking Google a question. But a lot of our bankers thought it was. That's what they were used to. They were used to asking a very simple question of Google and yielding a simple answer. They most definitely weren't used to adopting a persona. And they certainly weren't used to this collaboration where you're asking a question of the friend, they ping-pong it back, you adjust it, they ping-pong it back, and you get to a point where there's this iterative and collaborative understanding. That's a skill, right? We're learning to use ChatGPT in many ways as our friends, and in this case, as our bot friend. It's your phone a friend who can drink in 8,000 policies in 10 seconds. Your seconds, even less than that. You're not used to that. So there was a lot of learning in that, but through the process, we were able to rack up some awards. And we're also rolling out soon, actually, this growth guide solution. Now, imagine that there's thousands of, whether you're in retail, whether you're in telecom, whatever industry you're in, you've got all of these, in our case, branches that are out there, and they're engaging on an ongoing basis to try and figure out what is it that's happening, right? Where are we growing? Where are we suffering? Where is there opportunity for incremental changes? Where do we have bankers doing really great jobs where we can replicate and do it differently over here? Now, in a traditional sense, for all of us who've grown up in data and analytics, and I have for 25 years, we would end up creating report after report after report, right? Scorecards, deep dives, and you'd have this library of reports. And if you were a really skilled banker, you would know how to go in there and grab that information. You'd grab that report and grab that report, and sometimes you'd have your own cottage reports, right? They're under your desk. You'd have access to the information because the data existed, but it existed in this cocktail of reports that were scattered about. The difference here is that, again, through natural language processing and asking a question, it's like, where do I need to grow today? Where am I down? Where am I up? If you were me and you were a leader of a bank branch, where would you focus your energy today? Who's doing it well, and who should I get to collaborate with so-and-so? That question, asking like the uber person who would understand how all performance monitoring worked. And positioning it in a way that you can use AI to be able to govern that and to guide you in those conversations. And for us, we call that growth guide. So we've got experimentation happening all over the place. These are just a taste of examples and some of the ones where we've racked up some accolades. Now, you can well imagine in some of the examples that I've offered, this change there's some chances that we're taking in the process of it, but there is a world of change. And I will say that as we sat down to contemplate as analysts, I've grown up as an analyst, you look at the technical pieces, and I thought, okay, now that's going to be tough. It's going to be tough to build this thing, right? It's going to be tough to secure the right environment, and who do I talk to? I talk to Amazon, I talk to Microsoft, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to go build this thing over here, and I'm going to chunk the data, and boom, and that's going to be tough. Well, boy, did we learn a few things. Because the first up, I would say, is that AI is not a fit for all things, but people, because it's popularized, they think it is. So they show up, and we run a group of 500 plus people who cater to the needs of various segments, products, countries, channels across our organization. So we're the destination for a lot of ideas. So people are sitting home having a drink, and they're on Instagram, and they show up the next day, and boy, have they got a few ideas. So we're the filter for those ideas. Now, first up is whether it is even a fit. And when I say AI, I mean not only Gen AI, I mean whether it's a fit for NLP, whether it's a fit for machine learning, whether you could automate the thing. But one way or another, you're going to need data in a particular form that is usable. It doesn't need to be perfect, but it does need to be in a reasonable form. It needs to be reliable, and it needs to be in a space where if you were to employ AI against it, you're not going to get clobbered, regulatory-wise or otherwise. There also needs to be obviously a financial payback. And I think the lion's share of people who've been focused on AI have been focused on cost savings. And we see this around the globe. It's reduction of headcount against specified areas for repeatable tasks. But what we're finding, and I think there's a fit for AI, it's a number of things. It's the employee experience that improves the efficiency of that individual. And in the process of creating capacity in that individual, might you deploy the incremental capacity that's been created in that individual to be able to do revenue generating tasks? So it's a bit of a threefer, I would say. There's revenue, there's cost savings, as well as experience for both customer and employee. And in our case, there's a risk mitigation element in there as well. So we've been evaluating each of these AI use cases going, okay, what can they play on? What are the levers they can play on? And then ranking the ones that are going to do as many of all those as we possibly can. And then finally, feasibility. And so this is like, are the conditions in place for this to succeed? And a good chunk of that, to be candid, has to do with the actual, can you hear me all right? Thank you. Has to do with the actual people. AI is not created equal by way of use case and benefit, but it's also not created equal in terms of the individuals who understand it and who will absorb it and who will run and deploy it. You got a lot of wall of resistance, a lot of doubters, a lot of people who are unsure of it. So you need a dance partner, and I'll talk about what a good dance partner looks like. And feasibility is everything from data through to the insights available to be able to garner this, through to the dance partners who can help you roll it out. Because as we see it, there's three models, and I think these are traditional. There's cases where you actually need a human alone to do a particular task. There's places in that mucky middle where there's a human in the loop of a process. And then there's situations with AI alone where you go sheer agentic. And on the human alone, I don't think it's only where in the situations where they're highly collaborative tasks, where people expect, like a mortgage, to sit across the table from another human being, because they don't always. There's aspects of a task that can be AI-ified, and then there's aspects of it where you need a human alone and a human in the loop. And so we've been interrogating journeys, onboarding journeys, financing journeys, employee onboarding journeys, whatever that happens to be, looking at the entire journey and going, what aspects of it can you AI-ify? I think every job on the planet ends up being influenced by AI, but the way we're talking about it media-wise is that it's impacted by AI in whole. It's like, I'm going to replace Susie with this bot over here. But maybe an aspect of Susie's job called meeting note-taking is going to be replaced by AI. But that still changes her job in a fundamental way. And what we've been learning is that there are tasks that require a layer of subjectivity, that require some level of escalation management, where the data's imperfect, where we're like, yeah, we're not really sure how to handle this problem, we've not yet seen it before, or it just requires too many bounces from one channel to another. And then what we're finding is we call that residual work. In some cases, that residual work is offloaded either to a human alone or to human and AI alone. And I'll give you some examples of that. But we've been looking at these tasks from end to end with the filter, if the glasses are on our face, going, we have an AI-first mindset. So if we're going to build a new task, or we're going to interrogate and tear apart an existing task, what aspects of it can we automate? What can we AI-ify? What can we put in some form of a bot? And what does that bot workbench then look like over time? And where do you really need the human? And need is a strong word because there's humans who are uniquely differentiating and being an elevated customer experience. To be able to create that level of alignment with an individual and that understanding and that interrogation and that idea to be able to understand truly what it is you're looking for from us so we can go back into the organization and get it. There's aspects that are unique to a human that AI cannot do. And so we're at work trying to figure out what are all those. And moreover, what are the areas where people expect you to play and where it's enhancing for them? Because there's definitely a role for all three. It's just figuring out at the task level where it's going to fit. And so based on that, what we found, and this is an example from a bot. So we'd rolled out a bot more recently. It was a policy bot to our front lines. And there's thousands of people who are using this on an ongoing basis. But they're learning, right? We co-created it with them. It was an agile format. All the questions that they would typically ask, and they'd go back to the library of 8,000 things to gather answers. They helped us to figure out what those common questions are. And so as you can imagine, we would create prompts and guardrails to help them understand what the right questions were to ask so that they would yield the right answer. So we had this co-creation, and I'll call it buy-in. But like with anything, when you're doing change, you have buy-in and you have kind of the clear onset of buy-in. People are like, yep, I'm all in, and they're helping build it. And then you have the ones who are kind of like, yeah, I showed up because my boss told me to, but here I am, and I really don't believe that this thing can do anything you think it can do. And so in this whole proof of concept stage, even while you co-create, you hit this chasm. And probably 10 to 20% of the things that you thought you were going to get, you get them, but the rest kind of falls through the chasm. And we call that residual work. So there's stuff that you think can be, technology can be, it's an AI fit. In my triangle, there's feasibility, it's financial, it's a fit. We know AI can do it, and yet they're not doing it because it's a human adoption issue. So that first wave of adoption, 10 to 20% of people are like, I'm all in. I get this, I know how to use it. They're familiar with prompting, they ask the question, they trust in the answer, they carry on. But then there's residual work that falls through. And one thing we learned is we didn't fully understand the percentage of residual work that was going to fall through. We thought, well, is it going to be all? We're like, thinking it's going to be 50%, 60% that's going to go through the bot. But no, it takes time, right? So that second chasm after the initial adoption, you're change managing through the whole thing. Like that earth is all change management after change management, and it's encouraging people and having them buy into the value proposition by having them be part of it. You're encouraging them to take part and ask the right questions. You're correcting them when they're looking at the different ways of asking a question to make sure that they're getting out of it what they need to. You're going through this process through to the point where people are adjusting to the change, and now you're running two systems. You're running the old way of doing things because they got a library of policies, and then you're running the new way of doing things, and you know how that goes. Many people default to the old way. It's just like how people are still using COBOL. So you get these things happening right in the background, which we too had. So one way of looking at it is you shut off the tap. You know what? Everybody has to go over here, but then are we going to risk them asking questions of the bot like they would of Google and getting a wrong answer, or becoming frustrated, or saying the damn thing doesn't work, throwing AI out with the bathwater? So we're in the swirl of navigating that. You got those early adopters who are noisy, and then when the tide becomes so strong, it's like when you're standing on the beach and you're standing there and the waves come, and at some point they're so great that you're like swept up in the current. So we're at that point now where but there is still residual work that falls out. There's edge cases. There's stuff where you're in between a policy, or it's too complex, or it hits multiple things. So what do you do in those cases? And I think that the residual work from AI that comes out after we AIify and after we automate all the things that we can is a new normal, but it's a bit of peas and carrots. It's the stuff left over after the meal that you never really thought was going to be there. And you weren't really sure, was it a carrot or what is that work? Like you couldn't anticipate it, nor could we. When we sat down to look at it, because as analysts, we're like, this can be AIified, therefore it should be. But the reality is some stuff just isn't in the end. It's some combo meal of stuff. So I think that new normal workforce ends up, and it's not that you stop and that you don't try and interrogate and go after those problems and weed it out and AIify as much as you can. But even after that's all said and done, there's peas and carrots left on the plate. The main meal's been consumed, everybody's satiated, AI feels really good, but there's work left over. So how do you plan for that work? And if you go higher for that work, what does that then look like? Because in the world that I envision, if people are setting out to hire, now we do a job description and there's a list of tasks, but embedded in those current tasks is stuff that can be automated and AIified right now. Yet we're hiring for it with the intention that later it's going to be AIified. But I think that there'll be a world where there'll be an AI workbench. Should I actually hire for this person? in this individual because I need a human in the loop or a human alone to do that task? Or over here, do I have a bot workbench and say, I'm gonna actually hire that bot, hire that bot, hire that bot. It's an EA bot, it's a coder, it's a this, it's a that. I'm gonna use a bot for those things because my workbench is a combo meal of robots and humans and a bit of both. And so in this process, what's happening is there's work left over, and then what do those jobs look like? And so what couple things we learned, and then I'll bring it home and I'll be open for questions in a few moments, but we learned that the hard part of AI is really not the technology. And we spent a good number of months arguing with our IT folks, how are we gonna stand this thing up? And if life for a hotel and you're the Sheraton, we want a room in the hotel and we need to make sure this has flexibility, we want a common architecture. And their answer to us was like, yeah, okay, that's interesting, but like, the answer is we don't know because the world is evolving at such a rapid pace. So we learned that it's really more about people, process, and change. Not that it's not about the technology, but the technology is ever evolving. And we certainly learned that AI was not just automation because it enables a bunch of different things, right? It enables enhanced decision making and new business models. It's more than just that. We also realized that you don't need perfect data to start. And we realized you could use AI to augment your data and fill in the gaps. So I think it's a fallacy that you got to go hunting in the place where everything's perfect, or wait and invest in the data till it is perfect and then go and then eventually get to AI, because you'll miss the market, you'll miss the efficiency play. And I would use AI as the opportunity to get those dollars to refine your data where it was really difficult to do several years ago and has been for my entire career. I feel like I'm there like a panhandler asking for a few bucks every time I want to enhance our data for the good of the company. And I mentioned before, AI is not only cost savings, it's broadly speaking against your KPIs. And does it replace human expertise? Well, I think a lot of our value we're seeing comes from that collaboration, but we're realizing that there's residual work left over that we need to anticipate in advance in our business cases so people don't get too ambitious about what it is that the cost takeout might be, but also making sure that you have the right human left over in the end in those escalation units, dealing with the peas and carrots in a way that makes sense. And so finally, from our transformation learnings, a couple things here. I think AI is a mindset shift. It is not a thing. It certainly is the greatest innovation, I believe, of all of our times, and surpassing that of the internet, but it is a mindset shift. And so those of us who are building AI capabilities on the technical end have to be elastic and figure out how we actually encourage an organization to have a broader understanding of what it means to play in this space. So I've spent a lot of my time in the change management space, a lot of my time convincing my colleagues, schooling them, taking them through Copilot and helping them understand what it can do, like going kind of person to help them and their groups understand the power of this thing. Else, what they think it is what the stuff is that they see on Instagram, which is tricky to navigate when you're in a corporate structure. On the second one, it's choosing teammates really wisely. And this is people who are strategic, innovative thinkers, future forward. Everybody wants AI and they want the cost savings, but some people are just rooted in an old way of doing things and they kind of sort of want it, but passively want it. Pick dance partners to start who actually get it and who are willing to transform and go ground up and play agile. Grab those partners. In our case, we've played a lot in our contact centers and some of our places where I've got a really good dance partner and I know she gets it as well as I get it, and the two of us are very passionate to make change. And I would not underestimate the amount of change. This is a world of change. And typically we set up our functions in vertical ways. You're running products, you're running channels, you're running segments. This bisects in a horizontal fashion our organizations like nothing ever could. And so you know how hard it is to navigate change within one pillar of your organization? Well, imagine you're running end-to-end processes. You need change champions, and we've gone so far as to set up whole change functions in our analytics team. And our analytics team is on the road talking to people, which they don't like to do. They like to stay in their pajamas coding in the background. It is like pulling people out of their comfort zone. But if we don't do it, AI doesn't get adopted. And if we don't do it, we don't get the magnitude of change that we're hoping for. And I would say, too, on those pieces where the residual work falls through, a building of a bot isn't a once and done. It's a continuous process where you're retooling. So in our world, where we'll have many, many of these running at any one time while we're maintaining and building, you have to figure out how you actually budget for the enhancements along the way to keep these things fresh. And I think that we haven't faced that yet at scale, but I suspect it will come. And I would say with respect to governance, I've not consciously spoken as much about that today, but I think the world that we're in for is what is the implications of data flow. So we think it's difficult now to look at where data resides in different databases, how the insight is generated off of it, and then what actions one takes on account of it. That's hard enough today, right, through a lot of our data flow, whether it's Informatica, Lation, whatever it is that you're using, to be able to monitor the flow of data and where it shows up. When you imagine that in a world at scale through automation and where data is being transformed and there's intelligence that's being deployed, it is really difficult to be able to manage flow in an environment like that. So I would always build, of course, with governance in mind. And we use Agile all the way through in the building of our bots. I'd highly recommend it, but the complexion of those teams I'd suggest would be different. It's not enough in our experience to just have folks who are actually programmers or coders who are part of that pod. We've put in what we call an AI activator role, who's bridging some of our classic infrastructure needs with the folks who are actually doing some of the coding, because we're finding when they come into our analytics team and ask a technical question, the type of technical question, people don't have answers for it. So we're having to do a lot of triage within our own technical teams to procure those answers, which slows down the pod. So we're figuring out ways of being able to gather that information while still ideating, and that's proving to work. Small tests, but continuous. Testing big, or start small and test big. We have learning objectives for AI along with cost and revenue and risk and employee experience objectives combined. We've got all of those at play, but we've looked at what do we want to learn. It's as important to us as what we actually make or save from this process. The final couple thoughts are around process itself. So if you're looking at a task, whether it's an onboarding process, I think everybody onboards a customer in some way, shape, or form, you got to make sure that those processes are in some way documented. And you can use AI to say, what are the typical processes, but you still absolutely need the ability to understand where they pass on and off to. Because if you're building with agentic in mind, you're going to want to pass that data all the way through in an effort to take action. And so process documentation, we realized early on, is going to be a gap and is going to be something that we're going to really need to spend some time on. And on the tech side, now this is tricky because we're in the process of finalizing or building, I would say, an AI business architecture. So this isn't T&O or technology and operations coming down from on high and saying, hey, you're going to cloudify this, you're going to use these solutions. It's from a business perspective saying, all right, what are the things, where do we want AI to sit? Where do we need it to sit in the construct of the business? What are we going to build? What are we going to buy? How are we going to govern it? What is the end-to-endness going to look like of that process, which is really hard in an environment where all of us are getting pummeled by consultants who say, I can build that for you, I can build that for you, and it's great, and I actually know that they can build that for us. The problem is I'm going to put it on some workbench, and that workbench isn't going to be attached to anything, and it's going to thwart the end ability for us to go to agentic. So the AI architecture, as much as you can, ideate along the way and think about what that's going to look like. And you need humans to do that, right? People are in the best position to figure out all of these moving parts. And I would most definitely build with agentic in mind. This is not the end game, right? We are going to be in a space where we are going to want to automate the workflows. We are going to want the absorption of all of AI to be taken up by some of these automated processes. So build with that in mind, architect with that in mind. Place those bots in a place that allows for that fuel to occur and allows for you to get to that endpoint where that full end-to-end automation is present. I put my contact information up on the screen. You're going to see one call out for women in, I'm a big proponent of women in STEM, and I know there's 2% of us here in the room in the C-suite, so my salute to my fellow colleagues and women in STEM. There's a women's circle here, I'll Excel, which will help empower you in this very space, and feel free to connect with me through BMO and LinkedIn, and I'm happy to take, I think I have a few moments here for questions, so look for a mic runner, and I welcome your comments.
Thank you for that. That was super helpful and insightful. I got two simple questions that might not be simple. What keeps you up at night? And what is the thing that you're most excited about?
Love that. The thing that keeps me up is the governance when you're automating and you have agentic in play. It's getting the architecture right to be well governed. That 100% keeps me up. And the thing that I'm excited about learning the process of what it takes to build bots and build them well at scale. Like I'm really excited about that because there's stuff you don't know that I'm learning, but I see the future is quite rosy when it comes to the ability to be able to leverage a bot as an a worker next to us who can help us. But I'm realizing there's stuff I don't know, so I want to just accelerate the learning. But I'm keen to do that. Good question.
Thank you so much, Laurie. I'm sorry we do not have time for questions, but please give Laurie a big round of applause.
Thank you so much.
That was amazing. Thank you so much.